Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Kensington system. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted up until her death in 1901. She was just 18 years old when she found herself on the throne, and it was all by chance, as she was actually 5th in line when she was born. This is all stressful enough, but certainly one of the worst parts of her upbringing was being brought up under the Kensington system. This basically all started when her mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this system in order to control her daughter, literally just isolated her away from all of her friends and even from other family members, and apparently this was done to keep her quote-unquote pure. The Duchess would monitor her every move, she would decide who she could see and who she could speak to, and Victoria only had 2 friends she could play with growing up, one being her half-sister and the other being her mother's attendant, Sir John Conroy. Victoria was even forced to share a room with her mother until she was queen. She couldn't even walk down the hall by herself. In the end, Victoria placed a lot of blame on John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She even called him the demon incarnate. In our number 9 spot today, we have the royal affairs. There have been many rumors over the years about the royal family and their extramarital affairs. Okay, I'm not saying it's a tradition, but it happens a lot, and I'm saying this goes way back. So far back that one of the first accusations of this within the royal family dates all the way back to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Since then, it has only continued with people such as Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, Princess Anne and Commander Timothy Lawrence, and of course King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla, just to name a few. The latter of those definitely being the most famous, especially when the now king was confronted about it by his wife at the time, the beloved Princess Diana. Apparently, King Charles responded to the confrontation by saying, quote, "Well, I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." Maybe not the attitude to keep when you're speaking to your wife, who you're cheating on. I don't know. Guess I'm just not royal enough to get it.
Number 8. Comrade Cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nicky were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nicky's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchalier after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea, but either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need, and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm in the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and After this, there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand. Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations, and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes, but just won't admit.
Number 2, stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins, and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know about the queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution, and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no member members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family.
So the first one is 800 dogs. Yeah, that's it. That's it. This man right here, 800 dogs. Why? Maybe he wanted to star in his own remake of Air Buddy franchise, but with a Bollywood twist. I'm not sure. I'm not him. I don't know. And who is he? The Maharaja of Junagadh, Muhammad Mahabat Khan III. Now that is a name. Alright, so that title in Sanskrit means great ruler, but I think last ruler is a little bit more accurate because that's exactly what Muhammad was before his negligence in decision making during the Indian independence of August 1947 put him out of job. He screws up spectacularly, chooses that Junagadh should accede to Pakistan, and quite literally gets ran the hell out of Junagadh by Indian government. He lives out the rest of his life in exile, but enough about the man, let's hear about the dog. So, as mentioned, 800 is a real guaranteed number, but varying accounts actually say he may have owned as many as 2,000 dogs in one time period. Each dog had its own personal room in the palace, fitted with furnishings, their own servant, and of course phones, so that the dogs can call each other. I don't know. Dog died, state of mourning's declared. 2 dogs bang one out, now there's a new litter of puppies. Gotta make sure they're married, so it's not bastard puppies. This man reportedly spent 20 lakh, aka 2 million, on a dog wedding and proclaimed it a state holiday. He's done the same for their birthdays as well. This next story can be abbreviated simply to the PPVRM. What's that stand for? Pepe, the pygmy, and the very rich man. Harkov was one of history's earliest explorers 4,000 years ago in the 23rd century BC. He made his living wandering out into uncharted lands. But on his 4th expedition into the unknown, the pharaoh's scribe had messaged him to drop everything and return at once. Harkov had sent a letter to the king some time ago describing a friendly pygmy clan Harkov had encountered. The pharaoh at the time, Pepe II, who was an 8-year-old nightmare child, who'd you know, happened to be obsessed with pygmies, and quickly wrote back. You said in this letter of yours that you have brought a pygmy of divine dances from the land of the horizon dwellers. Hurry and bring that pygmy you have brought alive, happy, and well for the divine dances to gladden the heart, to delight the heart of the king. Such was life under the rule of an 8-year-old, so Harkov returned to Egypt, pygmy in tow. But all of the letters from the pharaohs, this letter from Pepe meant a great deal to Harkov. He literally had it engraved on the walls of his tomb. This was a dude who discovered the lands around Egypt far and wide, served many pharaohs, and even single-handedly talked a kingdom out of war. So why so gassed over delivering a petite person to a child? Pepe loaded Harkov up, that's why. Homeboy spent the rest of his life as an incredibly wealthy and powerful man through that payment. After a lifetime of discovering distant kingdoms, opening trade routes, and bringing back exotic discoveries, Harkov finally made his fortune just by entertaining a child. I would have been grinning ear to ear too, dude. This story is a BumbleBee classic because this king is a pure kook.
Number 8. King James. Not to be confused with LeBron James, although he's a pretty good king as well. He's alright, that fellow. This is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. Don't do it or else you're a sinner, I guess. Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth of the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood. First of all, what? What did you just say? Why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles, like it's a Harry Potter spell? You know what I mean? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century. A doctor's like, ah yes, just a flower petal will fix that. A doctor with one of these comes in? No way, not listening to that guy. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV, apparently he never took a bath. And his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by walking by them. He would walk by and they'd be like, ugh. Guy's got Steven Tyler's hair. What is that? Like, can we cut it if it's infected with gross? Can we just, maybe a bald king? How does a bald king sound? Number 7, King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552. He was known as a collector of sorts. These royals, they like to collect things, they like to spend their money on weird things. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. See, his castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep, my friends. He also collected human artifacts, this royal, so that's a bit odd to collect when you're a royal. Imagine having company over, you're like, yeah, watch the lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Do you want a drink? Let me get you a drink. King Rudolph II, okay, he's quite important in history, obviously. He supported the scientific revolution a lot, and he also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff. Number 6, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube doesn't like when I say some words, specifically a word that rhymes with Yahtzee. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, I have to mention it. The Duke was also referred to as a bad boy, but just how deep did these incidents cut? Was he like topless on a beach and he's bad, or was he dressed up as something horrible at a Halloween party? It was the latter. Before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from that party. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No. Did he dress up like a witch? No, it would have been fun, but no. Photos leaked of him wearing a World War II German soldier outfit. Can't say much here, but it was even equipped with a specific armband. Yeah, we can't show you either, but you get what I'm saying. This was a not great time. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way. He's a royal, and he does this instead. I don't know, it's very off-putting. Harry said afterwards, quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone," end quote. Wow, he really meant that one. Really came from the heart, that apology. It was a poor choice of costume, and I apologize, he says. Okay, number 5. King Henry II. This is a quote that people believe was Nostradamus predicting the death of King Henry II, who actually was a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be scary. Hey, how do I tell you this? Well, at one point, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible Henry, King of France. Unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death at the age of 40. In the summer of 1559, a terrible jousting accident went awry and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I told you it because many think that Nostradamus predicted this. The jousting incident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and his skull by one of his young soldiers, and the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one." Yeah, he's jousting and then the eye, and then it happened. That sucks. Number 4, Prince Charles the vampire. Now, some of these theories, yeah, they're a bit out there. I didn't make them up. I wish I did, but I didn't. Some believers out there actually think Prince Charles is a vampire, a blood-sucking, flying, turning into a bat-looking vampire. I don't know. Why? Because Prince Charles is related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, that 15th century ruler who inspired the story of Dracula in Transylvania, who we're all pretty sure was a vampire. Now, it's a fun theory that went about, but Prince Charles having a piece of Romania is definitely helping out this case. We kind of believe this. The prince has been conserving forests and he even got property over there, so maybe he's a vampire, maybe not. Maybe he just likes property and castles. And Vlad the Impaler. I heard he's a great lad. A great Vlad. Number 3, shapeshifters. Awesome. I'm not actually Taylor, I'm someone else pretending to be. That's cool. That's why I'm so energetic today. This next theory I wish I could claim for my own again, but it was actually former BBC presenter David Icke. He takes the cake himself. Here we go. He has since revealed himself as a conspiracy theorist, and one that surrounds the royal family had me stunned. Icke and quite a few others claim that the royal family is part of the Illuminati. Yeah, and then all of them earn their power because their human ancestor mated with reptilian aliens. They were clapping alien reptilians. That's how they became royals. That's the trick. You gotta clap some reptilian alien. David says the theory actually explains why royal families are obsessed with keeping their bloodlines clean with other royals. And you know, incest. But the biggest what the part of all this has to be when David told the public that he knows people who have seen royal family members change into reptiles and then back into human form again. Number 2, leaked letters. We'll end with some recent leaked letters. We love those, we love some gossip. We mentioned Princess Diana, well, we've got more stuff, we've got more tea. In May 2018, the royal wedding, it was thought at the time that Meghan's father was absent because of a heart attack that he suffered days before. But a year or so later, it's revealed that Thomas Markle and the new Duchess weren't as close. There was some drama, there was some beef going on in the family. Thomas spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal where Meghan spoke to Oprah, the tell-all that we all watched, and Meghan actually said to her father that if you tell me the truth about what happened, about working with paparazzi, then we can help and get through it. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated. Yeah, if my dad was working with paparazzi, showing them private letters as well, just for clout, I'd be upset too. As if my dad can't even open his iPad without me, let alone leak my letters. Number 1, personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst thing ever or the best, but it's kept me laughing for months now. Royals have been sweating constantly about other people trying to, you know, take them out, right? It's a scary job. Everyone wants to attack you. I mentioned Boy Jones on here a few times, that guy that stalked the Queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boy Jones would go through the Queen's drawers and, you know, big ooh. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate any and all attacks. Be as safe as you can be, right? Of course. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Oh, have you heard about these kissing sheets, this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, that's normal. But they also had a guy who would get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter, know what I mean? King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure the bed wasn't poisoned. So you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down everywhere before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure they weren't poisoned. Yeah, sleep tight. I'll sleep here, boss. Here we go. Don't mind the old medieval dad breath all over your pillows. You're safe for the night. That's so gross. I can't even sleep in a hotel sometimes, let alone some dude. Mwah, 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 mwah. Mwah, mwah. I'm like, what are you doing? Get this guy out of here. Why is he kissing my bed? Clothes as well. That was also touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, kissing my sheets? No way. I think I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off, get out of there.
At number 10, kleptomania. If you were a queen, then you would think that you had enough money to just buy whatever your little heart desired. Though that may be true, there was at least one famous queen who just straight up stole things just because she could. Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth's grandmother, was quite the kleptomaniac, and no matter how hard people tried to avoid having their things stolen by her, it just never worked. When the queen would visit someone's house, she would walk around looking at whatever knickknacks you had lying around, and when she found something that she liked, she would stand there and just sigh super loudly to get someone's attention. Much like how my dog used to sigh dramatically when he wanted food. Anyways, usually when someone heard the sigh, they knew that this was a sign that the queen wanted whatever she was gazing upon. Sometimes the homeowner would just give whatever it was to the queen as a gift. But if it was something that they weren't willing to part with, then she would either try to buy it off them or just straight up take it when no one was looking. This became such a big problem that people started hiding their prized possessions before hosting the queen in their home, but she eventually caught on to this strategy, so she just started showing up uninvited. She could not rest until she owned pretty much everything in the kingdom.
Number 9, no time to dine. If I'm eating, don't acknowledge me as a human being. I sound like a pug when I eat, okay? I don't waste any time. I love food, okay? It's business. Now, if you're a queen and you eat fast, well, everybody else has to eat fast as well. This began back in Queen Victoria's time. The queen loved to feast and she didn't waste any time at all. Like, it's really fast. The way the royal family works is that when the queen is done, that course or that meal, you're also done. So when Queen Victoria would smash an entire 7-course meal in 30 minutes, which apparently she could do easily, you'd be blowing on your soup still and Queen Victoria would already be telling everybody to pack it up. That's stressful. All because she could eat lots of food in a short amount of time. Also, once the queen gave a toast, you couldn't even speak. Also, once the queen placed her cutlery on the table, regardless of where you were during that course, everybody's plate would then be taken away at the same time. And the next one would then come in. I would just put my food in my pockets, you know, screw it. It's almost like when you go to all-you-can-eat sushi and you have like some sushi left over, you don't want to waste it. You're like, you know what? I'm not paying that bill.
They've got so little to talk about, it makes more sense to sit in silence. British royalty's list of permissible conversations has about as much flavor and depth as a boiled chicken breast, which the whole family kinda already looks like they eat for 3 meals a day anyways. But more on the British family and their notoriously spiceless food later. According to the former butler of Prince Charles named Grant Harold, the British royal family isn't supposed to discuss intercourse, religion, politics, or money, which are all incredibly relevant things for monarchs to be talking about. Literally all 4 of those things correlate with every facet of their title, job's existence, but okay prudes. It's against royal etiquette to discuss these subjects between royals, commoners and royals, or even for commoners who are just at a royal event. Prince Charles was apparently a regular breaker of this rule as proven in 2015 when The Guardian won the 10-year legal press for the release of the so-called Black Spider letters. The Queen herself has made many indirect references to political battles, and naturally the media aired out Meghan Markle when she once whispered her approval on Ireland's vote to legalize the Big A for women. in. Instead, Grant said it's advised to discuss travel and the weather only. This has got to be the most boring family on earth, guys. I couldn't survive 2 minutes in that house. When you're royal, you have the pick of the litter, but not without consequence. Much like Queen Elizabeth in the UK, the Emperor of Japan, currently Naruhito, who took the throne in 2019 following the abdication of his father, Akihito, does not play an active role in politics for the country, more so a mouthpiece. However, they still follow some of the most wildly uptight rules imaginable, and one of them is how female members of the Japanese royal family are forbidden from marrying commoners. You can marry who you love, absolutely, but baby girl, should it be a commoner, you have to forfeit the princess status for them. Once known as Princess Nori, now Sayako Kuroda, she took this step in 2005 when she married her older brother's longtime school friend. Princess Mako became engaged to Kamarua, former classmate, in 2017 and addressed the press stating, "From the time I was a child, I was aware upon marrying I would give up my position as a member of the imperial household. Given that situation, I tried to assist the emperor and do whatever I could to fulfill my role as a member in the imperial household, while also valuing my own life." The two were wed in 2021 and Mako now works in New York City. Naturally, there are double standards. The same sacrifice was not required of Prince Akishino, the brother of Sayako, and when he married outside of the Japanese aristocracy. His wife is the daughter of a university professor. Ashiko's wife wasn't the first commoner woman to marry into the Japanese royal family, but she was the first from a middle-class background and was subsequently harassed and dragged through the mud. A royal family that says, hey, leave the dog out of this. Thailand had a pre-existing law that if you insult the members of the royal family in any kind of way, keep in mind it's the royals themselves that get to decide if you offended them, so you could really get in trouble for just like picking your nose near them. It could land you in prison. Each of the offenses is 15 years in prison too. And that trash talk can be in person, in writing, graffiti, or social media. Cue my example from 2015, a man named Thanakorn was charged by a military court for making a sarcastic internet post about Tongdang, aka Copper, the much-loved street dog that had been rescued by the king himself from an alley. In fact, she's so praised for her loyalty and obedience, Tongdang is a household name. The king wrote and illustrated a book about her in 2002, and an animated film in 2015 called Kong Tai Dong, an inspiration, was second in the box office that year. And this regular everyday dude, Thanakorn, understandably rolls his eyes hardcore and let the jokes fly in a social media post about said movie. I guess he didn't realize the dog counted as a royal family member, and he went to prison for 3 months. But others have gone to prison for decades as the injured magistrate convictions have surged since Thailand's arch-royalist generals seized power from the elected government in May of 2014. One man was jailed this year for 30 years for insulting monarchy on Facebook. Now for the legal obligation to be taken to the grave. Working for the pharaoh could be pretty lit as long as it wasn't forced captivity. If you were hired staff for arts, music, foods, hygiene, whatever, you'd be paid spectacularly, housed and fed well. Overall, you had a good go of it. Until there comes a day where every pharaoh gets mauled by a hippo and has to take a dust nap. Because of their strong belief in the afterlife, Egyptians were dedicated to ensuring that they carried the things they would need into said afterlife. Tools, cooking utensils, makeup, a brush, a long narrow glass bottle filled with buzzing bees. I see you, Cleopatra. In the case of pharaohs, who were considered to be the most important people alive, they required their workers, enslaved or contracted, in their afterlife if they were to continue living lives of comfort and luxury even after death. Many other individuals of high rank in ancient Egypt who had staffing would also often be buried with their workers, the same as pharaohs, treated as if they were moving into a new house with their masters. And this was the rules. You were a servant, you were expected to go quietly, willingly. Hell, they wanted you to be so excited you practically threw yourself in the tomb and begged them to bury you in. Before any of the pharaohs that are the most famous today came into power, however, the tradition underwent a change. Obviously, burying people in there is pretty cruel, and after a while people got real sick of having to die when the pharaoh does. However, the pharaoh still requires servants in the afterlife to perform various menial tasks for them and maintain their palace. This led to the introduction of shabti, tiny carved figures that were placed within the tombs of the pharaohs. They're shaped like small mummies, and each of them had special details carved into them on what jobs and tasks they would have in the afterlife. Imagine pointing at a fish and going, "Hey, look, a fish," and its response is, "That is Lord Fish" to you. Quite the case with carp, of all creature, literally the dirtiest little bottom feeders there are. They eat just about anything, thus earning their meme status as a garbage fish. However, carp, like koi, can be fortunate and seen as good luck. In fact, talking about carp the way I just did could get you in massive trouble during the Tang Dynasty, because carp has the same pronunciation as the Tang Emperor's last name, Li. According to the Miscellanea area of Yuyang, which is a record of legends, folk customs, and herbal remedies in the Tang dynasty, carp had to be referred to as Lord Red Carp to show respect to the imperial family. Also, those who happen to catch carp should relieve the fish immediately. It's not acceptable to eat them, and those who sell them will be flogged 60 times. However, like all legal provisions, this law was only as good as its enforcement, and judging by the amount of Tang poets who wrote about catching and eating carp without any record of punishment, seems like this law was very loose. Emperor Renzong of the Yuan dynasty had a similar idea as his Tang predecessors. The Yuan dynasty historian Yang Yu recorded in historical notes that during the Renzong reign, people in the capital were not allowed to hold chickens upside down. Offenders would be convicted, probably because the emperor's zodiac sign was a chicken. Now, it's China's shorty selection system in the Forbidden City. Inside the Forbidden City, most women were maids and servants, but there were the notorious concubines. Their task was to bear children to the emperor, as many as he could father, because that's what he was focusing on when walking into a harem of women who couldn't say no to him and were also the baddest biddies the empire had to offer. Anyways, women were selected for the court as early as the Jin dynasty, and the aesthetic selection criteria did range from emperor to emperor. According to law, all young unmarried women went through the selection process. Only girls who were married or had a certified physical disability or physical deformity were exempt. Whenever selection time rolled around, the Board of Revenue sent notices to the officials in the capital and the provincial garrisons to enlist the help of the clan heads. The banner officials then submitted a list of all available females to the commander's headquarters, and they set the date. During the Qing dynasty, girls were brought on the appointed day to the Shenwu gate of the Forbidden City for inspection. They'd be accompanied by their parents, nearest relatives, together with their clan heads or local officials. Social background was actually no barrier, and many emperors chose concubines from the general public. The empress was the one exception; she had to be for a high-ranking official. Less than 100 candidates would be selected to spend the nights with women who specialize in training and managing maids. Candidates' bodies were inspected for infections, body hair, body odor. Think of that beginning scene in Mulan, as stereotypical as that is to say. They advanced through 2 more levels of concubine boot camp, weeding out the weak, America's Next Top Model style, and finally, the selected few would take their lives as easy-baked baby ovens. Womp womp. Next. Imagine someone wants to make sure you like the food, so they find a way to measure your enjoyment. Literally measure it. Like, get on a scale, big boy, it's time for your weigh-in. Absolutely crazy. So listen to this. According to a 2018 Grazia Daily article with the representative of British Windsor family, before and after Christmas dinner, everyone gets weighed. Ho ho ho, jolly occasion. The weird tradition apparently dates back to King Edward VII's reign in the early 1900s. His Majesty was apparently concerned about the people's health and whether or not they're eating well enough on Christmas. So, each person attending this dinner is required to get weighed on a pair of antique scales both before and after eating. If they gain in weight, it signals they truly enjoyed themselves at the table and the king did his job. Oh yeah, and you are obligated to know how much you weigh too before and after, so don't think you can ceiling stare your way through this one. The tradition was depicted in a scene in the 2021 film Spencer, in which Princess Diana, played by Kristen Stewart, understandably tweaks a little and expresses her distaste over the entire debacle. Pop off as usual, Princess D. Some other fun royal Christmas activities are the guests are expected to enter the room in order of seniority, whatever the hell that means, and wear paper hats even though the queen doesn't have to wear one. And last but not least, rules are meant to be broken. Like all monarchies, Spain does have its royal protocols, and they regulate the normal stuff, how you talk, walk, dress, the elegance in which you hold your regal frame. Spain has these royal protocols alright, and we know that because Queen Letizia is constantly making headlines for breaking them flagrantly and with a smirk ever since her husband was crowned. In 2014, royal watchers gasped when she wore a little black dress with a short skirt that was see-through all the way up to her mid-thigh. Conservative royals frowned that when she wore a sleeveless dress to a formal dinner. She wears pants and shorts and sweatpants. She forgoes traditional shawls and enormous hair cones for Brandy Melville and cute ponytails with highlights. Stylistically, the previously divorced commoner and formal journalist, which I have to add because you know that was hella drama when she was made queen, is basically the opposite of her mother-in-law, who's now Spain's former queen, Sofia. Letizia probably takes extra delight in flaunting their differences since the two hate each other with a passion and have gotten in shouting matches in public.
Number 10. Elizabeth I. Good old Queen Bess is one of the most remembered queens in the British monarchy, male or female. She's a pretty big deal. Elizabeth loved to make her fellow male nobles fall under her spell. She was witty, cunning, and very well liked by her court. However, one of the things that earned her some enemies was establishing a Protestant England. Her sister Mary, her predecessor, fought very hard for the opposite. She was very Catholic, and we will get to how bloody that was later, but Queen Bess pissed a lot of people off, especially Spain. She was supposed to marry the Catholic Spanish king after her sister passed, but she turned him down. This led to a conflict between Protestant England and Catholic Spain, but her navy defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. Mary, Queen of Scots, laid claim to the English throne and was one of Lizzie's greatest internal threats. Mary was a Catholic, which made all the Catholics of England back her. Mary was also presumed to be behind several assassination attempts against the Queen. Finally, Queen Elizabeth had to take action, and after keeping her cousin hostage for 20 years, she finally had to have her executed. And we'll talk more about her later. Number 9. Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great was called the Great for a reason. She was a pretty epic woman by most accounts. She even had one of the first vaccines, which is pretty crazy. Though she wasn't actually born in Russia or even Russian at all, Catherine was not content to go down in history quietly. She considered herself an enlightened ruler, and history tends to agree, with aims of prioritizing education for the people. She had many lovers, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the son she had was illegitimate. Peter III of Russia was hardly the man Catherine intended on marrying, and later planned a coup against him, which resulted in her position of power. However, the coup did turn bloody when on July 17th, Peter died under mysterious circumstances. There isn't proof that she was directly involved or even knew about it, but it cast a dark shadow over her reign for the rest of the time.
Number 8. The Virgin Queen Elizabeth I. This is a historical channel, so I would like to grab a few times in which the royal family went through some historical troubles. Queen Elizabeth I is one of the most well-known British rulers in history. Her life has been extremely well documented, and she's also the possessor of an interesting title, the Virgin Queen. It is claimed that she had never been romantic with anyone, though this is hotly contested, as while it's clear that she very well did not have any official children and never officially married, these are the Tudors we are talking about. You know, there's no conclusive evidence that this ever occurred, of course, and that would become even more true as more of her reputation was based entirely on the notion that she was unwed. But dude, the Tudors, I mean, yeah, I doubt it. Number 7. Princess Anne's dog. The first member of the royal family to ever be convicted of a criminal offense, and it was this one. Yeah, see, Prince Anne liked dogs and decided on April 1st that she'd take her dogs out for a walk. Before we get into the details of this, I want to make something clear. Not all dog breeds are bad by default, though different breeds require different degrees of attention and care to ensure they're probably sociable. I have to be honest, but when you're a member of the royal family by blood or leash, I imagine that people are going to have a hard time house training you. So it's no surprise that there were 2 bites that day as a result of the poor social training the dog had received. As a result, Princess Anne pled guilty to the charge under the Possession of Dangerous Dogs Act, which is a thing in the UK. Look, dogs are great. I'm a cat person. All animals need to be raised with attention and care. Same goes for people. It's pretty clear to me that the royals are equally as bad at doing both. Number 6. Edward VIII. Here is a historical doozy for you. Anyone remember the reign of King Edward VIII? No? Well, you probably blinked, because it only lasted 10 months. From the moment of his ascension, Ed Boy was clearly aiming for something weird. He was starting to get a little more open about politics, which is a big no-no in the royal family unless you're being racist, then it's okay. He also wanted the face that would end up on his coin to point in a different direction. These did actually get printed, but are super rare. He also wanted to marry a woman, but was told he couldn't, so he started getting a little annoyed and eventually abdicated the throne for love. Well, we're glad he moved on to better things, and there are no embarrassing photos of him meeting with certain people from certain countries prior to certain wars. None at all. Number 5. Princess Margaret's affairs. This isn't really much more than tabloid fluff, but this scandal was a massive pain for the entire royal family, and it was pretty clear that she couldn't care less. A whole bunch of dudes got involved in this, and it wasn't until I learned that it didn't involve Pete Townsend of The Who, but Pete Townsend of Who Cares, and guess what? Just like every single romantic relationship covered by the press, it sucked for everyone involved, but ultimately nothing all that interesting really happened at all. Number 4. Covering up Prince Andrew. It's mostly atrocities from here, so buckle up. I cannot say what was alleged to have happened with this case, but what I can say is that there's smoke, then there's fire. The entirety of Prince Andrew's existence has been one massive sham, and the fact that the royal family continues to deny knowledge of it in any way would be laughable if it weren't so teeth-grindingly frustrating. I do genuinely believe with all my heart that they knew, and they didn't do anything about it until it was going to get on their shoes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you can dive down that rabbit hole yourself. You've got your rules, I've got mine. Number 3. Prince Philip. I have many words for Prince Philip. Words like good, which are immediately followed by riddance. Yeah, Elizabeth's husband was just about the least interested royal in even mildly disguising his attempt for anyone that wasn't a man, white, or as rich as he was. There are so many quotes, so many, they're all horrible. I don't want to say them here, I don't know if I can say them here. Like, there's taking the mask off, and then there's just being an absolute loser. I've heard dudes with the stars and bars tattooed under their breasts say the same things this mummy has said over the course of their equally worthless existences. Not to mention a similar proclivity in dating partners, as Philip and Elizabeth are cousins. Dude passed at 99, which was just about 99 years younger than he looked, and 99 older than he deserved. Number 2, the Bowes-Lyons. When Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were born as the cousins of Queen Elizabeth, they were said to have passed at birth. However, it was revealed that they'd in fact lived, but due to their classification as imbeciles, they were abandoned at Earlswood Hospital and their existence was hushed up completely. Seriously. No one went to their funerals, no one cared. The people that are the face of the country will abandon those they view as worthless for no better reason than to keep their image pure of mad blood. They were never visited, no one cared, and it isn't uncommon. JFK had a similar thing happen with his sister, except that was even hidden from him. These are your politicians, your rulers. Look at them go. Wow, look at them. Going all the way over there. And in at number 1, you kinda had to guess it, it's Diana. The entirety of this was a nightmare for everyone. More tabloid crap, a marriage that happened out of convenience, and the straight up mistreatment of a woman made public via dishonest journalistic methods, which was then immediately followed by her unbelievably tragic passing. But Diana was easily the only royal who actually tried to do something with the power she had. Even if it was lip service, just touching a victim of AIDS at the time was enough to change the minds of an entire public. She actually stood for something, but the royal family's image will never change, and it'll never have to.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against two-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kinda difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like, what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampon Gate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving.
Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what, that's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, you know, it's history and, well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and then his skull as well by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." Okay, already we're a little bit spooky. "And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death." So I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying, kinda nailed it. Number 7, a fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria, her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So on one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. Imagine, that's like some ancient Egypt. Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements. And the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know. Number 5, Meghan Markle, solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarms, we woke up early, and we all watched the royal wedding, right? We sipped our tea in our pajamas and we pretended like we were there, right? Just watching, along with the other billions of people online. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was just a no-show. Yeah, Meghan just walked down that aisle by herself in front of 1 billion people watching at home or streaming it, and it was thought at the time that this was because of Thomas's health. See, right before the wedding, Thomas suffered a heart attack, right? Just days before, so of course nobody was upset. It was almost expected for him not to show up. But cut to a year later, we began talking again. Thomas and the Duchess are now not close, it seems. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter at one point. There was a huge scandal where Meghan even spoke to Oprah, like Oprah and that big tell-all, and Meghan actually said to her father, "If you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, we can help." And he wasn't able to do that, and for me, has really resonated, especially now as a mother, end quote. So yeah, they're not talking, I guess, anymore, which more than fair. If my dad was working with the paparazzi, showing them private letters, I'd be a little pissed too. There's no way though, the guy can't even unlock his email, let alone sending one? No way. Number 4, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's divorce. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla Parker before his divorce from his first wife, of course, Princess Diana. Imagine having this is crazy, a princess? You cheated on a princess? That's insane. So in turn, Princess Diana addressed the relationship and what's happening during, you know, that famous 1995 interview with BBC. She couldn't have said it better, if I'm being honest. Diana said herself, quote, "Well, there's 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Yeah, end quote. There's no better way of putting it, I think. That's a pretty baller way of saying it. I don't know. I haven't said baller in like 13 years, but I'm like, you know what? That's a baller move. It's pretty gangster. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was busy looking at their directions, it seems. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only 1 year before her tragic car accident. Now later in 2005, Charles ended up marrying Camilla. Has anyone seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looked great in that movie, and now I want to watch it. Is it worth the watch? Let me know in the comments. I didn't see it go to theaters or anything. It kind of snuck by me. I was sleeping on all the good ones. Number 3, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube isn't a fan of some words, specifically one word that rhymes with Yahtzee, and it goes deep with history, as you could assume what I'm talking about. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, right? The Duke was always referred to as a bad boy, right? He was the bad royal. The bad boyle royal. I don't know, I'm trying new shit here. But just how deep did these incidents cut? Well, before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology back in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from a costume party, and a few of them were in poor taste. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No. No, he did not. Did he dress up like a witch? Like a little witch, maybe with a nice witch broom? No, none of that either. No, photos leaked of him wearing World War II German soldier gear. Yeah, I can't say too much, but it was even equipped with an armband, a very bad armband. Again, I can't say too much, you know, nor will YouTube allow us to show too much, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You remember. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way he wanted. He's a literal prince. And he does this? It's off-putting. Harry said afterwards, and I quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologize." End quote. Nice, right from the heart. That's good. Really goes deep with the royal history. We love it. Number 2, Vegas getaway. Nice, roll those dice. It's one thing to party like a rock star, but to party like a prince? What does that even mean? I gotta keep this Prince Harry train going because, well, now I'm mad at him, but there's even more photos from history that show what was really going down in the royal family, you know? His priorities, dare I say. After that party incident, just 7 years later, scandalous photos emerged from Harry's Las Vegas trip. Yeah, I had a little boys' night, it seems. It turns out what happens in Vegas may just leak online for your entire family to see, and your grandmother. That's probably not a great time. These scandalous pics were taken during a strip pool game. Lovely, we like that. Make sure you call the right pocket while you're not wearing any. The scandal actually prompted St. James Palace to contact the Press Complaints Commission before the snaps even made their way to British tabloids. Yeah, they knew right off the bat they were fucked. They're like, can we call them? Can we send a pigeon? What's the fastest? And finally, number 1, Boy Jones and other attempts. Okay, being the queen and all in history, a security team is always needed, obviously. And during her reign, specifically Queen Victoria, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. First attack was in 1840. It was an 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford, and he fired towards the Queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, of course, afterwards, he was actually found not guilty due to, you guessed it, insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her, both also missed. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, might I add, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. Then these incidents kept occurring again in 1842, 1849, and 1872. Attempt after attempt after attempt. But then things got a little worse and, dare I say, a little bit more weird. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for last because it's so horribly creepy. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841, and his name was Edward Jones. Edward Boy Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once, right? Before Assassin's Creed came out, no idea how we thought of this. Guy just knows a route in, and he would break in and would hide under the Queen's sofa. That was his go-to spot. Or he would sometimes just sit on her throne. And one of the worst things ever, sometimes he would go through her drawers. He would go through the Queen's drawers. That's so gross. What? Like that's gross. He would steal her clothes until eventually and thankfully he got caught.
We're gonna start with the classic, Who's My Mummy? Around the year 1341 BC, a royal child is born by the name of Tut-Mahaten, the living image of Aten. Sometime after Dad's death, Tut rebrands to Tut-Mahan. This is because his dad is the legendary dumb Akhenaten, who tries to force monotheism. Anyways, some scholars believe that Tut's mom was Ak's principal wife, Nefertiti, but others believe his mother was the secondary wife named Kia. But with either theory, we run into the issue that it's not entirely certain that Ak was even Tut's father. Getting cheated on by both wives, that's when you know you're doing something wrong. It's quite possible that Tut's father was the pharaoh Smun-Akhara. While DNA tests of several mummies found in the Valley of Kings seem to indicate indicate that Tut's father and mother are buried not far. Egyptologist Marianne Eaton Cross also points out that whereas these mummies are very clearly close relatives of Tut, it's actually difficult to establish precise familiar relationships using only DNA. Egyptian royal families like to preserve the bloodlines, so his mom could also biologically be his sister and cousin, and all of that would show up as an indecipherable mix that does nothing to confirm more than just a relation. If it is Nefertiti, the question remains, where's my mummy? In more recent years, speculation about King Tut's tomb is that Queen Nefertiti, whose tomb and sarcophagus are long lost to us, is buried somewhere within. This claim is made by Egyptologist Nicholas Reeve, who realized that the cartouches depicting Tut had being buried by his pharaonic successor Ai had been painted over cartouches of Tut burying Nefertiti. Reeve said close inspection of Ai's cartouches revealed clear underlying traces of an earlier name, that of Tut. In its original version, this scene had shown Tut performing the funerary rite over the tomb's original owner, his immediate predecessor Nefertiti. The new evidence, specifically the north and east walls of the treasury being man-made structure whilst everything else is cut stone, does support the theory that Tut's tomb is only an outer section of a much larger tomb prepared for and still occupied by Nefertiti, whose own independent sequence of funerary chambers lies beyond. It would also add context as to why the king had such a small, oddly shaped burial chamber.
Number 8. Afzal Khan. Everyone remembers King Henry VIII for doing what he did to his wives. A naughty, slap on the wrist, naughty, don't do that, for shame. However, I would like to offer Afzal Khan as the alternative monster here. He didn't unalive a handful of wives like Henry, no. He actually managed to rack up a count of 63. Yep, you heard me right, 63. First off, I don't know how you have that many wives and or remember names, let alone birthdays and anniversaries. I would not do very well in that situation. Well, what's the reason for all this blood spilling? It's pretty horrible, actually. Simply because he was being invaded, and the guy who was invading him and winning was slightly nicer to women and was going to most likely give them a better life. Jeez, talk about if I can't have it, no one can. God. Number 7, Caligula's wife. I think in a healthy relationship, you ought to put your partner on a pedestal. Maybe your partner is drop dead gorgeous, a promising athlete, or really enjoys building Legos. Nice TIE fighter, babe, way to go. Yeah. Emperor Caligula of Rome liked to put his wife on a pedestal, literally. And while on this pedestal, she was wearing nothing but her birthday suit. Oh boy. Well, all of his friends, politicians, generals got to gawk and stare at her, and in some weird goth power flex, he would oftentimes hold a knife to her and tell her that he could just end her life whenever he wanted because he can do that. Not to mention the guy had a complete narcissist complex, building statues of himself everywhere just so she can like, oh great, there he is again, it's him again. Number 6, Genghis Khan. I bring the man up again because he's responsible for so much loss, so much blood spill, so much pain. Sure, they were effective warriors and archers, but they were brutal, dude, especially him. They took what they wanted when they wanted, and it's said that he was responsible for so many lives lost that it affected the carbon footprint of the planet. Dude, that's insane. That is literally insane. Also to note his treatment of rather, mistreatment of women. YouTube won't let me say much, but I can tell you that these ladies were not inviting him into their bedrooms. It wasn't good. As it stands today, because of his bedroom misconduct, his DNA still lives on. 5% of men worldwide share his DNA. Number 5, Pedro of Castile. Pedro of Castile was doing as the European monarchs do. Sometimes you gotta marry for alliances. Sure, it makes sense. Your kingdom is much less likely to get steamrolled by a larger kingdom if you have an alliance with fellow kingdoms, or the bigger kingdom itself, actually. Pedro of Castile married the young Blanche of Bourbon of France, and so Spain could just be a wee bit more snug, in case the English come over. You gotta be careful. But Pedro just wasn't having it. What he was having instead was a mistress named Maria. So instead of enduring a loveless marriage, he had poor Blanche locked away in a tower, just like Sleeping Beauty. Except a handsome prince was not coming to rescue this damsel in distress, but a man with a black hood and a sharpened axe. You know what I'm talking about. As Pedro had her unalived. I was gonna make a joke about Rapunzel and let down some hair so she could make an escape, but I mean that's just awful, really. Imagine being locked up in a tower for so long. Sure, I love the indoors, but you gotta let me out at some point, Chief. Do you think I get food delivery apps to work up in a tower? Because otherwise you have to let me out, dude. Comic-Con's coming. Anime Convention North's coming, buddy. I gotta go. Gotta get my Naruto on, bro. Come on, man. Number 4, hands-on funeral. This one's just gross. When you're in a relationship, it can provide you with some great things. Someone to go through life with. Companionship, love, and if you're lucky, someone who's a good cook or a baker. Love me some baked goods. However, also in a relationship, sometimes you do more than that. Sometimes you get a little close under the sheets, if you know what I'm saying. Take King Philip V, for an example, who loved loving his wife so much that, he just couldn't help himself, you know? Like for instance, when his wife tragically passed away, he wanted one last ride. But he penciled in one more trip to Toe Curl City before she was laid to rest. God, that doesn't seem right, you know? That just, let her go peacefully, you know? Let her just, Number 3, Lenin. Okay, while not a king in the most stereotypical sense, he did dethrone a king and made himself an autocratic dictator, which is basically a king, just modern. Trust me, it is. Yep, trust me. In a nutshell, Lenin had been anti-royal for most of his life, but after some help from some sneaky Germans and other Soviets loyal to his cause, the Tsar had no choice but to abdicate, like I said at the top of the list. He abolished the Tsar's secret police and then put in his own. And had people oppressed, which was one of the main reasons why the whole revolution started in the first place. See what I'm getting at? He was supposed to get rid of the evil monarch, and he became the evil monarch. Well, see, then a civil war broke out, and then he was worried that the exiled Tsar might escape and try to retake the throne, and, well, he had some goons take care of him, and, well, the family too. You can never be too sure. You gotta take care of everything. You gotta get rid of everybody. You just can't be too sure. Number 2, Pope John XII. For those who aren't very religious like myself, the Pope is the big one. He's next to God, and for a minute there, he was the most powerful man on earth. Seriously, I mean, this guy could crown kings. He's the king of the Vatican and the king of kings in the Holy Scripture. It's kind of serious. And today he's got a really cool car for parades. The BumbleBee is pretty sick, not gonna lie. However, Pope John XII was anything but a sweet old man who delivers the holy messages from God. This Pope was doing a lot of anti-Pope behavior, if you will. Now, I for one wouldn't care if the man had a girlfriend or a glass of wine. Heck, some rules need to be changed, but this Pope was most known for his lavish, adult-themed parties, and was known for getting hangovers. It got so bad at one point, it started a war. Number 1, not so slick shady. Marshall Mathers, Eminem, the king of rap, and named king of hip hop by Rolling Stones magazine. Hence he's a king, I gotcha. Despite what you think of the man's lyrics, especially vulgarity, he's an excellent wordsmith and could write rhymes that would leave you tongue twisted. However, I don't think it would come to anyone's surprise that the man's got a few charges under his belt, especially the way he talks about Kim. There's a couple bad things said about her, I don't know. Back in 2001, arguably the peak of his career, Eminem assaulted somebody in a nightclub after getting fresh with his wife. He got 2 years probation. Maybe he is saying the things he's saying in those songs. Maybe he's telling the truth. I don't know.
Kicking off our list at number 10, Princess Diana. We'll start with a tragedy right off the gate. Here we go. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, he straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla right before his divorce from his first wife, Princess Diana. So, in turn, Princess Diana addressed that relationship and what exactly happened. During that famous 1995 interview with BBC, she couldn't have said it better if I'm being honest myself. Diana said, very confidently, well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. That's a Princess Diana roast, folks. Oh no! Yeah, Princess Diana, she's full of roasts apparently. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was a little busy, it seemed, and rightfully so. Diana's like, yeah, I'm not hanging out with this guy. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only a year before her tragic accident took her life. Later in 2005, he married Camilla. Yeah, has anybody seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looks great in that movie, and I want to know if it's worth the watch. Comment down below. Number 9, The Great Fire. One of the most wild Nostradamus predictions of all time. It reads, the blood of the just will commit a fault at London, burnt through lightning of 23's the 6th. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed. Now, there are of course many people who believe that this entry here was actually one that predicted the Great Fire of London that occurred in 1666. The line 23's the 6th and times 20 by 3, and then you add 6, you get 66. right? Quick math. But most importantly, it may also mention London and the royal family. And in real life, this fire did affect them as well. Also, it is said by many that the reference to the lady here is another term for the kingdom, the lady. This means that Nostradamus was predicting, maybe, that the kingdom was going to fall as a result of the Great Fire. So, yeah, he kinda nailed it. I don't know.
Number 8 is the Christian IV of Denmark. Even when he first took the throne in 1766, people were already convinced he was crazy. This brat threw food at dinner guests and picked fights, but rich people can be real jerks, so it wasn't until at some point when Christian discovered a newfound interest in his that he became an official write-off. This guy became so obsessed with the flicking of the wrist that it interrupted his royal duties. In fact, his court confronted him with the concern that it was affecting his health and could potentially make him infertile or insane, in an 18th century version of "stop that or you'll go blind." Thankfully, he didn't do it in front of visiting dignitaries at first. Instead, he just did other weird stuff, like leapfrog to them or slap them without warning or push them over. He'd randomly yelp or holler in the middle of a conversation. Eventually, the court's concern grew true, and Christian was so nuts that his personal physician managed to talk him into handing over the control of executive decision making to himself, also while banging Christian's wife in the background. Christian wanted to keep that appendage to himself, so I guess somebody else had to do the job for him. Or both of them, I guess. Number 7 is a mouthful, Nebuchadnezzar II. One of the greatest Babylonian kings, who I'll be calling Neb for my own sake, won battles against Egypt and Assyrians in his quest to make Babylonia the most powerful city-state. He gained control of trade in Mesopotamia from Syrian and Palestinians. He was powerful and tactical, and for 7 years he wandered open fields convinced he was an ox. This tale of insanity is documented in the Bible. According to Daniel 4:25, Neb had a disturbing dream in which his interpreter told him it meant, "You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched in the dew of the heavens." This prophecy fulfilled itself 12 months later when Neb fled from civilization suddenly. It's quoted he began eating grass like an ox. He became wet from dew. His hair grew long like feathers of an eagle, and his nails grew long like claws of a bird. Then at the end of that time, which was 7 years as mentioned, he says, "I am I'm Neb. I looked up toward the heaven and I was right in my mind again." Ironically, there's actually a medical term for this. Boanthropy is a psychological disorder where a sufferer believes they are a cow or ox, so I guess this happened enough times for a term. Number 6 is a wacky dude, Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire. Ibrahim's scandals are more ridiculous than empire crumbling. He was known for a deep, passionate love of plus-size women. Not in a "I like them thick" kind of way, but Ibrahim's juices started flowing for obese women. So this sultan had his agents track down the largest woman in the entire Ottoman Empire, said to have weighed about 280 to 300 pounds. The sultan was so delighted by her he gave her a high government salary and the title of governor of Damascus. Also the cute nickname Sekepere, which translated means a piece of sugar. Ibrahim wasn't even fully right in his mind before taking the throne. In the Ottoman Empire, it was normal for sultans to slaughter their entire family to ensure there are no corruption or attempts for the throne. Ibrahim's older brother actually let him live because he seemed so mentally ill, even as a prepubescent, to ever even be a threat to the throne. Which, by the way, Ibrahim only ever got because his brother died prematurely without heirs. So after drowning 280 concubines for having another man touch them and feeding tons of gold coins to fish in his palace pool and some other weird stuff, his reign was cut short when a coup led by the Ottomans' highest religious leader, as well as his 6-year-old son, had him strangled. Number 5 is the Zhengde Emperor of China. He is remembered as a notorious leader of the Ming Dynasty for both his wild behavior and his cruelty. His biggest scandal surrounded the poor decision to leave senior eunuch Liu Jin in charge of the state's affairs. This causes unseemly taxes and poverty and unnecessary acts of aggression, things the general public, tend to hate. The two finally fell out after 2 years, and Liu was sentenced to slow slicing, a particularly graphic, drawn-out, torturous death I don't recommend you look into without a strong stomach. Oh, and on top of that, he would waste the resources of his kingdom to play pretend. He would take the faux role of a general and went on raiding parties that were all dressed in silk. He even invented an imaginary best friend / alter ego named Zhu Shu. To the exasperation of the Chinese government, he actually made them address this imaginary friend or watched as he ordered it on pointless raiding missions. Ironically, it's rumored sometimes he'd even put on a wig to represent his own alter ego and have the courts address him as Zhu Shu. Eventually,
Zhengde the emperor unexpectedly dies at the age of 29 shortly after he drunkenly fell off of a boat and contracted some fatal disease in the Yellow River. Number 4, we can't talk scandal without Caligula. The emperor of Rome, he was born in 12 AD and lived to 41 AD. Caligula spent his time on the throne building lavish projects, exercising his sadism and brutality, and exhibiting eccentric behavior at any chance. Also cheating. So much cheating on his wife. Well, wives. 4 wives. Caligula sucked at settling down, and his proclivity for both genders apparently made it no easier. He was known to seduce senators' wives right in front of them, bring home working girls, and engage in affairs with theater acts, specifically a dude named Menster. He also happened to love banging his sister. These did not win him public favor. Caligula is said to have banned the mention of goats in his presence due to his hairy appearance, and also practiced facial contortions to make himself be terrifying to his subjects. He was obsessed with his horse, building an entire castle and attempting to appoint the steed to the high office of consul, and he once even had his army construct a 2-mile floating bridge just so it could gallop along it. After 5 years of this, his own army kills him. His unforgivable mistake was to jeopardize Rome's military reputation by declaring a sort of surreal war on the sea, ordering his soldiers to wade in, slash at the waves with their swords and spears, and carry chests full of seashells away as spoils of a victory over the god Neptune. Number 3 is Emperor Zhejiang of China. He's actually the cousin of the previously mentioned Zhengde Emperor. A family that scandals together stays together. And man, did this guy have some ideas. From dabbling in Taoism, he became obsessed with the legendary elixir of immortality and believed that collecting the menstrual blood of female virgins and using it to make a substance called red lead would give him powers that would enable him to live forever. Over 20 of these poor concubines were held directly for this purpose, as well as for his exploitations. They were only fed mulberry leaves and rainwater to keep them pure and faced harsh living situations. In 1542, 16 of these concubines emotionally broke and planned a coup. They were seconds from success had one of the conspirators not panicked and backed out, running to snitch to the empress. The emperor was unconscious for over 24 hours, and so the empress decided to deal out the punishments on her own and gave the 16 girls the terrible death sentence of slow slicing. Also, their family members beheaded and others taken into forced servitude. One of the concubines she'd sentenced, however, was the emperor's favorite, so when a fire broke out a couple years later in their temple, he actually let his wife perish in order she not be saved. Apparently, she'd always been too old for his perverted taste. The emperor died in 1567 at the age of 59. It's been widely speculated he succumbed to the toxic mercury contained in the elixirs of immortality that he had been ingesting over his lifetime. Number 2 is Charles III. He ruled from the time he was 12 in 1380 to his death in 1422, whilst under the 100-Year War of England was at its peak. Naturally, this is a horrible time to have someone dubbed Charles the Mad on the throne. In 1392, he shows his first red flags of instability when he suddenly turns on his own knights during a manhunt and starts attacking his own advisor. It took several knights to subdue him and carry him back to the castle. It's all downhill from there. While they had assumed it was stress that caused that outburst, in the following years it would prove otherwise. He began to forget people's names and roles, including his own. He would forget where he was, even that he was king. Maybe this was because he spent so much time running around the castle on all fours pretending to be a wolf and howling at people. By the time Charles was convinced he was made of glass and banned people from touching him lest he break, well, his family had written him off. But now there were multiple sides vying for that throne. So during the 100-Year War, civil war breaks out in the French monarchy between Charles's brother and cousin. This allowed England and other countries an immense upper hand in invasions, and so by the time Charles dies, much of France was occupied by foreign powers. And number 1 is Emperor Rudolph II. This guy was a known disaster. He was elected as the Holy Roman Empire in 1576 when he was already experiencing deep depression and mania. He also immediately tore up the religious settlement that for the past 20 years had kept Germany's Catholics and Protestants away from each other. Ending all peace, he embarked on a crusade to eradicate Protestantism from Germany's towns and villages, restarting an unnecessary war that had already been finished. Protestants' response was fast and strong, a self-defense league, alongside Hungarians rising in revolt and Turkish also taking an offensive. Rudolph ran his up to Prague Castle and hid, refusing to speak to anyone. This scandal has the Habsburgs replace Rudolph with his brother Matthias, who undoes all the damage by restoring religious peace to Germany and signing treaties with the Turkish and Hungarians. Rudolph has a tantrum over this and starts the Turkish war again. So the Bohemians appeal to Matthias again for help, and in 1611 Rudolph was forced to hand power over to his brother once and for all. He died a year later, only after laying the foundation for the disastrous 30 years of war that would tear Europe apart within 6
6 years of his death. Kiss the hand, which will be our first point. Believe it or not, kissing the hand, or feet, of a royal is a tradition that goes back to ancient times. Nowadays, the most remaining monarchies have tossed that tradition aside because, well, hygiene, it's annoying, people don't respect boundaries, and as a kid, nobody has ever liked that. Moroccan royalty, however, has hung on to the tradition. King Mohammed is a big ol' fan of this old-timely custom and has ensured it is legally mandated. Come across a royal on accident? Hand kiss. Having a meeting? Hand kiss. Why talk to the hand when you can give it a little smoochy smooch? Anyways, they did recently have to ban it for the duration of the pandemic to protect the king, obviously, but as of late 2022, the law is back. Hilariously, his son, like all little kids, hates the whole kissing thing. In 2016, a video went viral of Prince Moulay Hassan whipping his hand away and refusing to have a kiss as he went down a line of visiting dignitaries greeting them. His father found humor in it and widely joked the hand kissing tradition will likely be retired with the prince. Imagine being so good at your job it becomes law that you're locked into it for life. The Bureau of Astronomy for lifers. In ancient China, the emperor was known as the son of heaven, and society functioned off the concept that the emperor was God appointed. Naturally, the imperial government would regularly reinforce the idea of the emperor's divine right by using stories and symbolism that indicated heaven's pleasure at the emperor's leadership. The stories and symbolism came from astronomy, with the study equated to divining the future of the empire and its rulers. As of the Qin dynasty, their government had special departments specifically for celestial phenomena, drawing up calendars, producing advice, and evidence. When Zhu Yozong, the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, came to power, he was not only so impressed with the astronomers and their predictions, but also the ability to see past the normal eye. Why, hell, he decided the rules were needed to control the Imperial Bureau of Astronomy. These men were practically prophetic, and this skill invaluable. What if someone stole it, or one of them wanted to quit and waste their brains on being a farmer instead? No, Zhu needed to make sure that under wraps and locked up for only the Son of Heaven's use. His rule bound all officials in the bureau to their posts, forbidding them from transferring to other departments, leaving for another position, or learning another position. And because it felt like it was such a supernatural skill, surely it must be in the lineage. So their descendants were also bound to astronomy and forbidden from engaging in other fields of work.
Number 8. Grace O'Malley. We've got enough traditional royalty on this list that we definitely need to spice it up. Enter Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Pirate Queen! What a title. Definitely considered unholy behavior, Grace abandoned the traditions of women of the time and fled to the sea. There, she took on the waves and perils of Davy Jones' locker with a legendary ferocity. She was born into the Clan O'Malley around 1530, around the time of Henry VIII's rule over England and Ireland. Clan O'Malley was a notorious seafaring clan and ruled the southern shore of Clew Bay, Achilland, and most of the barony of Murrisk for over 300 years. Grace was really well educated and could even converse fully in Latin, Spanish, Scottish, Gaelic, and French. She was not one to be refused, and after spending years fighting the British, she finally met Queen Bess, and not only did she speak Latin to her, but she refused to bow as she was considered a queen herself by that point. Number 7. Mary Queen of Scots. I told you I was gonna bring her up. A name you will recognize as I've already mentioned her before, but in terms of who the villain in that story is, it depends on which side you're telling the story on. Mary's story is full of tragedy, romance, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Unlike Lizzie, Mary was a dedicated Catholic and spent the entirety of her reign trying to gather the Catholics against Elizabeth. She had a series of marriages and relationships that led to tragedy every which way she went. Her first husband, the Dauphin of France, died shortly after their marriage. Her second husband she loved until he became a drunkard, and then she just started running things. But he was mysteriously unalived while she was 6 months pregnant. He was inside a building that exploded, but his body landed outside and it turned out he was strangled, so what happened there? She would later give birth to 2 stillborn sons, but she would have sons later on. She would have a son who would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death, but it was due to Mary's plotting and scheming that eventually ended her in death. So she did actually plot to kill Elizabeth, so that's a pretty unholy deed, I would say. Number 6. Princess Olga of Kiev. Okay, wow, this woman. One saint you definitely don't want to mess with. Despite being a saint, Princess Olga of Kiev was actually pretty sinful. She was one of the most vicious and vengeful rulers in the history of Kievan Rus, which would later become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Olga took center stage after her husband died and made sure she would never be forgotten. Her husband died in a very gruesome way by the enemies that we're going to talk about in a second. When the people who viciously unalived her husband tried to persuade her to marry their leader, they sent 20 men. Olga told them to wait in their boats, had her men dig a ditch in the meantime, and the next morning buried the men alive. She then lied and told the king she would accept his offer if he sent his best company to retrieve her. He didn't know about all that stuff yet. When they got there, she locked them in a bathhouse and torched it. But it didn't stop there. Olga didn't stop there, that's not her style. She would later host a steak dinner with her enemies in which they were staked. Very Vlad the Impaler, I know. Then she set whole villages on fire by attaching sulfur to pigeons, and then it was just crazy. Damn, like hell has no fury like a woman scorned, let me tell you. Number 5. Queen Isabella I. The Spanish Inquisition, pretty high up there as far as terrifying points in history go. If you weren't willing to convert to Catholicism, you were tormented, interrogated, and burned at the stake. Who was behind this awful time in history? This lady, Queen Isabella I. Technically, as she was fighting for a holy order for the Catholic Church, this can be seen as holy, but was it? Burning people at the stake because they didn't share this belief? Not cool, Isabel. She created a secular government through her reign which allowed for the monarchy to have more power. Being a pious Catholic, she made Catholicism the official religion and created a tribunal to make this happen. Secret service or a secret police that spread fear wherever they went. Her direct influence caused the Jewish population to falter for a really long time after. Number 4. Fridegund of Soissons. Okay, I maybe said that wrong, so I apologize. Kind of impressed with her rise to power. She went from slave attendant to queen. How do you bridge that gap? No idea. Boy was she ferocious. Assassination and manipulation were her main political tools. Fridegund was among a small number of enslaved women in the Merovingian household that became a queen. Merovingian was the OG Central Europe before everything got split up. She survived political dangers and retained her husband's loyalty and could persuade monks and priests to jump onto her plots with ease. She encouraged her husband, the king, to set aside his first wife and then even take the life of his second. But his second wife, Galswinda, had a sister named Brunhild who became the mortal enemy of Fridegund. She had good reason to be. Fridegund continued to do everything she could to secure her position, one assassination after the next. She was a pretty stormy lady. Number 3. Bathory. Okay. Alright. Technically not a queen, I get it, but she might as well have been with the power that she had. So fight me. She's remembered as the most evil woman in the world in history, I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. Bathory was the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7, 1560 into a prominent Hungarian noble family, making her practically untouchable. She married a very famous war hero who is suspected of gifting Bloody Lizzie with the skills she used to kill. After she died, Bathory became obsessed with immortality. Supposedly when one of her servants accidentally spilt blood on her and her skin appeared younger after. Bathory then began her mission of horror, luring over 650 young virgin women to her palace and brutally taking their lives. She was even bold enough to lure daughters of nobility. Before draining them of their blood, she would make them suffer in ways you don't even want to imagine before bathing in the blood itself. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days on house arrest. Ugh. Number 2. Catherine de Medici, also known as the Serpent Queen. History colors her story as the tale of the evil queen. On one hand, she is remembered for being one of the most powerful French queens in history, and then on the other, she was blamed for the many atrocities that took place during her reign. Her regency was marked by the French wars of religion and the many games Catherine played within them. The Catholics and the Protestants, as previously mentioned, were at war, and she spent a lot of time trying to find peace. Kind of. But she was a passionate Catholic and is believed to have tried to remove a Protestant general from her son's side. When he survived the attack, she lied and convinced her son that the Protestants were responsible, so she scapegoated them. So he authorized taking the lives of their leaders. Enter St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Catherine implicated the general, which resulted in him being the first to be beaten and then tossed out of his own bedroom window. An estimated 3,000 French Protestants were taken out in Paris, but the total countrywide was around 70,000. And last but not least, Bloody Mary, actually known as Queen Mary I of England, so no, I'm not talking about the girl you say in the mirror 3 times so that she appears and you're like, wow, I'm haunted forever. Queen Mary became known as Bloody Mary due to her vicious tirade against Protestants in England during her reign. She even imprisoned her own sister, Elizabeth, who we mentioned at the beginning of this list, due to suspicions of treason. This was unfounded. She bore her father Henry VIII ill will after the stuff he pulled with the church and after having delegitimized her as his heir for a time. After Mary took the throne and married the Catholic King of Spain, she began carrying out her plan for England to become Catholic once again. In 1555, she revived England's heresy laws and began burning offenders at the stake, starting with her father's longtime advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She burned over 300 convicted heretics, most of them being common citizens, and dozens more died in prison, hence giving her the name of Bloody Mary.
Number 10. The Young Tsar. Being the leader of a nation is hard. I play a lot of city builders, trust me, I know. Being the leader of a nation whose people have been brutally oppressed by your family's dynasty for 300 years and in general living in very poor conditions, especially compared to the rest of the world, that's hard too. Even harder. Nicholas II inherited the throne from his father, which sounds great, but in reality was a lot of pressure to do so. As it turns out, Russia was in need of drastic change, and they would get it from the people and a bald man with very pointy facial hair. A communist revolution saw the Empire of Russia fall. 300 years of Romanov rule end overnight, as the Tsar was forced to abdicate his throne. So what's his crime? Well, not doing anything. Negligence. He did so much nothing that people had to do something. Number 9. Nero's steam. We've talked about Emperor Nero quite a lot on this channel, but that's because he's the down bad Roman emperor who puts opulence in Pax Romana. It's hard to pinpoint an exact crime or moment from him, as he's the guy you think about when you think of Roman emperors. However, his crimes against his wife Claudia Octavia are very notable. So when Nero was getting remarried, he had to get rid of Octavia. I mean, you can't have like 40 wives, you gotta get rid of her. But how? I mean, how do you get rid of a woman like that? He actually did the whole James Bond villain thing where the victim gets placed into a trap. It's very crude, but theatrical, because remember, theatrics are important, remember that folks. Hence, Octavia was banished to an island where shortly after she was locked into a vapor bath, where she suffocated. Naturally, to make himself look better, they made it look like she did it, not him. So yeah, what a great guy. What an absolute hero in that story. Definitely not a villain.
In our number 8 spot today, we have pets. As we all know very well, image is everything for the royal family, and that is down to the finest, smallest detail, including pets. It is well known that the Queen absolutely loved corgis, and how could we possibly blame her? Apparently, however, if a dog is not a corgi or a Labrador, it is socially looked down upon. Can't describe how insane that is. They're dogs. If you brought a dog who had just been rolling around in the mud everywhere with you, I could see why that wouldn't be as widely accepted among fancy social circles, but only giving the choice of a few random breeds seems kind of ridiculous. Apparently, Meghan Markle actually had to give up her beagle named Guy a few years ago before she joined the family, and then left it. I guess she can probably have whatever dog she wants now, so there's always an upside. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Charles I. Okay, this is one that goes way back and it really creeps me out. So King Charles I, right now we're on the 3rd, so we're taking it a couple back. King Charles I was tried for treason after the Civil War, and he ended up being beheaded in 1649. I guess in the 1600s everyone was beheaded, so this wasn't necessarily abnormal, which is certainly weird, but that's a history lesson for another day. The weird part of this, however, is that apparently his head was sewn back on his body so that he could sit for a portrait, or it was perhaps supposed to be a sign of respect. Either way, it's very weird and very gross. I feel terrible for whoever's job it was to do that, and I also feel bad for the artist who was forced to paint that. Talk about traumatic. It does certainly make sense though that people say that Charles' ghost still haunts a building, because there is no amount of haunting that could make up for being beheaded and then having your head sewn back onto your body. Okay, why'd we do the first part if we were gonna do the second? Could've just cut the middleman, you know? But instead, they cut his head off, okay? In our number 6 spot today, we have never travel in pairs. This is one travel rule that certainly makes sense, but it is really dark when you think about it. This rule is one that the British royal family, and honestly many people who can afford this sort of luxury safety, do nowadays. This tradition and rule is one that means that any heirs to the throne are not allowed to travel together. This is of course in case some sort of accident happens. Not every heir to the throne would be injured or perhaps killed. It's definitely very smart and sensible, but it has got to be grim, just constantly preparing for the worst thing thing to happen. It is of the utmost importance to the royal family that they preserve the line to the throne. Like I mentioned before, however, other people are now taking a page out of the royal book and are using this travel rule where possible. In our number 5 spot today, we have the black outfit. Another travel rule that the royal family must follow is in regards to an item that they have to bring with them on all trips, whether business or pleasure. It is pretty unusual to see the royal family dressed in black, despite when a specific occasion calls for it, but every time they travel, they're required to bring an all-black outfit with them. This is to prepare for the worst case scenario. If they are away on a trip and somebody important to them passes away, they need to ensure that they are ready with the appropriate clothing for when they're able to touch down on their home soil. This is of course very practical, but it's definitely kind of morbid. I mean, you're having to fuss over what you're gonna wear when you're actually just mourning the loss of someone close to you. It certainly wouldn't be the top of my list of things to focus on, but maybe that's why I'm not cut out for royalty. Okay. In our number 4 spot today, we have the rules of the road. Okay, this like rule or tradition or law, I guess, is probably one of the craziest things I've ever heard, but I guess it's been around for quite a while and I just had no idea. As it turns out, the monarch is the only person in the UK who is allowed to drive without a legal license or even license plates. Like, that's insane. I didn't expect the king to have to take a driver's test like everyone else, but just having a rule that allows them, if they chose to drive without any idea how? It's pretty bizarre. The good news is though, which makes this rule make a lot more sense, is that of course rather than driving himself, King Charles' chauffeur will be much more responsible for most of the driving for the king. Let's just hope the chauffeur has their driver's license. I'm not gonna lie, there's this like silly photo of the queen, and every time I think about like the monarch driving without a license, I just think of this like little photo. She's got like a little silly grin on her face. She looks mischievous. And that's what I like to think, her just driving with no license. In our number 3 spot today, we have the armed forces. This is a tradition or system that comes into play when a new monarch comes into power. So last year this happened with the king after the passing of the queen. It is definitely one of the most intimidating parts of his new role, and this is that King Charles now becomes the head of the armed forces. This means that it is his responsibility and he is the only person who can declare when the country is at war and when the war is over. Of course, he won't be doing this entirely alone. He needs to follow the advice and guidance of the government. The perhaps good news is that the new king has held quite close ties to the armed forces throughout his life, even spending time in the Royal Navy and taking flying instruction from the Royal Air Force during his 2nd year at Cambridge University. Of course, the hope is that he won't have to be in a position to make these difficult decisions, but when or if he's faced with them, we can hope he makes the proper decisions for the country. In our number 2 spot today, we have no touching. There is a rule that you just cannot touch a royal. I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons for this, mostly to do with security, but aside from a very lucky handshake, you really are supposed to keep your distance. I suppose it's because I live the life of a regular person, but I kind of feel like in some ways this might be a little sad. I feel like you might be lacking in so much connection with a ton of interesting people, and like some of the people that you meet, wouldn't you just be dying to hug them? You know, apparently this is part of the reason why the queen always wore gloves. She of course shook a lot of hands while making her royal appearances, and the same will likely go for the new king. Maybe he'll take up gloves as a fashion accessory, just like his mother. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the church. So we talked about the armed forces, and King Charles won't only be the head of the armed forces, but he will also become the head of the church in England. Quite a jump from talking about war and being the one who makes those kinds of decisions to being the head of the church, where things hopefully are quite the opposite. This is a post that British monarchs have held since the church was founded by King Henry VIII in the 1500s, and it appears as though the tradition will carry on. In this role, it means that King Charles will be responsible for appointing archbishops and bishops to their role. The king will of course be advised in this role by the Prime Minister, and it is said that the king is religious in his own right and that he has already spoken about how his personal faith has informed his approach to leadership.
And at number 10 is Ludwig II. Ludwig operated as the King of Bavaria from 1845 to 1886. He was an opera fan, builder of dream palaces, spendthrift, deposed monarch, and likely the victim of a coup. So, Ludwig was an enthusiastic consumer of art, so when he was appointed to the throne at just 18, he exploits his status for entertainment. He funds his hero, the composer Richard Wagner, on some of the era's most renowned operas. He also built Neuschwanstein? I can't say it properly to save my life, but it's a fairy tale palace on a hilltop. All this lavish expenditure was causing more and more debt in the empire, and so higher taxes. It caused in 1886 conspirators to file a false medical document declaring Ludwig insane and unfit to rule. He may have spent an insane amount of money, but he himself wasn't. So, irregardless, that next morning, Ludwig and his personal physician are found floating dead in a Bavarian lake with no indication as to what had happened to him. One of Ludwig's most famous statements had been, "I wish to remain an eternal enigma to myself and others." Well, goal achieved. Number 9 is Henry V. Can't talk crazy without bringing up this guy. He's famous for his rinse and repeat style of having wives. As you may know, first he gets a wife, then he gets tired of her and is annoyed she can't have his male heir, so he obtains a side piece. So now you get rid of the initial wife, usually through and then marry the side piece. Repeat. He did this numerous times. Henry also slept with just about anyone he could find, including his second wife's sister, and he may have fathered 2 of her kids. Ugh. And Henry is recorded to have a minimum of 12 mistresses outside his 6 wives, but there is potential for more. When Henry takes up wife number 1's lady-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, he had actually subverted the entire religion that they were a part of in order to divorce his initial wife Catherine and marry this mistress, effectively establishing a new church in which he became the head and changing the course of history. The huge scandal came not so much from that, but because in 1536 Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, 1 her own brother, and plotting the king's assassination, which was a sensational news story at the time. But if someone does lay beyond those walls, and it's not Nefertiti, then knock knock, who's there? Few scholars share Reeves' optimism that any new chambers contain Nefertiti's tomb. There's something about her specifically that fills archaeologists with dread and defeat, like she's the popular hot girl at school who would never look at them. The desire to find her mummy is potent, as it would be a tremendous discovery and greatly contribute to the study of ancient Egypt. Frank Rahel of the University of Zurich compiled a list of other royal relatives that he felt could be interred there, including Tut's older sister, Mary Hatton, his possible mother Kia, and of course Smenkahera. There is a belief, however, that if it is Smen, while Nefertiti died, Tut had her interred with him. Possibly because, as mentioned, the dude could be his dad, but also maybe Tut knew his mom loved this guy more than Ak. I don't know, I don't got time for ancient Egyptian Kardashian drama right now. All I'm saying is Tut could have cracked that tomb open, buried Nefertiti, closed it back up, and when he died he got buried in the frontmost room. But to appeal to my ancient alien theorists, is it alien matter? On the flip side of educated leaps, we have alien conspiracy. Egypt's own antiquities ministry announced a few years ago that there were signs of extraterrestrial activity discovered after some radar scans of King Tut's tomb. The radar scans, according to French archaeologist Avril Sapp, refuted theories that Queen Nefertiti's tomb is hidden beyond that of King Tut, and instead revealed weird and extraterrestrial material appeared to resemble a body. However, both Sapp and unnamed antiquity officials refused to answer questions concerning whether or not it could be alien remains. But the AO did confidently boast they could not even come up with something like this in the National Treasure or Indiana Jones movies. This is revolutionary. We don't know what there is, but we've never seen results like this before, said Sapp, who coincidentally discovered dinosaur bones in the Pyramid of Giza a few years ago on April 1st, 2014. Whatever's inside of there could hold secrets to everything behind ancient Egyptian history and technology. Egypt will continue to conduct radar testings and scannings to determine how to enter the hidden chamber without damaging anything inside. Next on the roster, how do you die? One important question that's likely never going to be answered by anything that might be contained in newly discovered chambers is how Tut died. Let's run through some of the many options, shall we? Was it A, King Tut's knee was broken so badly that it was a compound, the bone piercing the skin and causing massive bleeding? Although a fatal leg fracture fits the idea that Tut had died abruptly, it cannot be stated for medical certainty that the fracture occurred while Tut was alive. It's possible his knee was broken after death. Was it B, Tut's death was caused by an infection that resulted from said fracture? Not the result of a chariot crash, by the way, since Tut's physical impairments would have made chariot racing impossible. His immune system was weakened from several bouts of malaria. But maybe it was C, Tut may have been killed by an elderly chief advisor and successor I. An x-ray of his skull revealed calcified blood clot at the base, and it could have been caused by a blow from a blunt instrument. Or maybe it's D. New analysis of CT scans from '03 show Tut was embalmed without his heart and anterior chest
chest wall, structures that couldn't have been removed by tomb robbers or anyone else. The assumed cause was an extensive crushing and tearing injury like the bite of a hippopotamus. Despite not knowing how he died, we know after he did, there was a big ol' succession mess. Post-Tut, the pharaoh plot gets all dicey. Hormuzd was the chosen heir for the throne and was off waging war against the Hittites. The coup theory for Tut's death revolved around his elderly chief advisor Ai, because we do not know how or why a high official like him came to be king of Egypt otherwise. He definitively stole the crown and throne from Hormuzd in his absence though. Ancient letters suggest that either Nefertiti or, more likely, Tut's widow Akhenaten was desperate to prevent Ai from becoming pharaoh and asked the king of the Hittites, who they were at literal war with, to send a prince who could marry her and rule Egypt. An and Nefertiti are erased from history around that time. During his short reign, King Ai tried in vain to achieve peace with said Hittites, while also simultaneously trying to prevent Hormuzd, the true regent of Tut, from seizing the throne while he's alive and after he died. To do so, he named an heir, an army commander named Nakhemti, who we know as perhaps to be Ai's own grandson. As you can imagine, Nakhemti became Hormuz's great rival, but Ai's successor would finally be Horem when his 3-year reign ends. Horem would then rule for nearly 30 years and then remove all known history of Tut, An, Taa, Nefertiti, and Tut's father, Akh. Now that's a mystery as to why. And while we're on the topic, where is An? For over 3,000 years, her life has been a mystery to us and mostly made up of bizarre facts and strange omissions, like that despite being the third daughter of the pharaoh, she was once his wife too, before marrying her half-brother Tut. When Tut died, the corrupt priests chose an heir, General Hormuzd, known lunatic. Anne was terrified and realized the kingdom was being lost to corruption and secret societies. She potentially writes to the King Hittites during their time of war as mentioned, offering herself and the throne of Egypt to one of his sons. The prince in specific was Zanzania, and he set out for Egypt and is killed before he arrives. Historians believe this was Hormuz's doing. Anne is forced to marry Ai so he can steadfastly secure his place on the throne, and then like that, she vanishes from history, an absence that some historians say signal her death. But it isn't the only time that has fragmented her story. An's role of ancient Egypt's most contentious period was lost deliberately, excised from the annals of history by the new dynasty that rose to power just decades later. DNA testing, she may have been one of the female mummies found in Key V21, but for now, she remains shrouded in mystery. The story of the Cobra and Canary is next. Howard Carter, self-taught archaeologist, plunderer, thief, and is responsible for the discovery and opening of King Tut's tomb. Prior to said opening, he had bought a golden canary, hoping its chatter and song would cheer up his empty house. When he first brought it home, one of his housemates tells Carter, "It's a bird of gold that will bring luck. This year we will find a tomb full of gold." Well, howdy doody, either that bird summoned gold or the maid is a fortune teller. Within a week of purchasing the canary, Carter discovers Tut's tomb. And before knowing whose tomb they had found, the workers nicknamed it the Tomb of the Golden Bird, a bird that becomes an omen of what's to come. During the recent excavations which led to the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, Mr. Howard Carter had in his house a canary which daily regaled him with its happy song. On the day, however, on which the entrance to the tomb was laid bare, a cobra entered the house, pounced on the bird, and swallowed it. Now, cobras are rare in Egypt and seldom seen in winter, but in ancient times they were regarded as symbol of royalty, and each pharaoh wore the symbol upon his forehead as though to signify his power to strike and sting his enemies. And obviously this segues us to the classic mystery of the mummy's curse. I'm of the opinion anyone who pillages or destroys history deserves to have a curse, so Howard Carter and company, please continue rolling in your graves, bud, you earned this. So, George Herbert funded the excavation and died from blood poisoning days later. Legend has it, when the Lord Carnarvon died, all the lights in his house and in Cairo, Egypt mysteriously went out. Howard Carter gave a mummified hand wearing a bracelet inscribed saying, "Cursed he be who moves my body," to his friend Bruce Ingham as a gift. Ingham, that man did not like you. His house burned to the ground not long after, and when he tried to rebuild, it was hit by a flood. George J. Gould dies after one visit. Aubrey Herbert dies of gum rot. Hugh Evelyn White takes his own life, but not before writing in blood, "I have succumbed to the curse which forces me to disappear." Aaron Ember and his whole family dies, and Richard Bethel is suffocated by apparently the Satanist Aleister Crowley of all people. Archibald Douglas Richard died 3 days after X-raying Tut, and then James Henry Breasted dies on his next Egypt trip. Mystery, or what do you think? And last on our list is the alien jewel. The amazing story began 77 years after Carter's discovery, when an Italian geologist noticed something odd about the yellow-green scarab in the pectoral center. The subsequent tests proved that the lump of glass was older than any Egyptian society, a lot older, in fact. Experts trace this scarab back to the Great Sand Sea, 500 miles southwest of Cairo, in which there are known to be huge lumps of glass poking out of the dunes. The general opinion is that a meteor hit the desert hundreds of thousands of years ago, heating the sand enough to create glass. To give you the idea of the magnitude that this supposed impact, the first A/B testing done created a thin frost-like layer of glass in the New Mexico desert. Meanwhile, chunks of glass the size of literal human heads can be picked up from the Great Sand Sea to this day. That means this meteor hit with an impact that we humans can't recreate on a different type of scale. But there's no evidence of a meteor that has ever struck the desert. If this glass is of meteoric origin, then there should be a crater of that age, says Boston University Farouk Al-Baz. But no crater, let alone partially fused or a serial piece, has ever been found. This suggests the less exciting origin, a supersaturated lake of silica that slowly dried into a natural glass hard enough to resist a scalpel mark. What do you think? Mystery glass from aliens or no?
Number 10. Harry and Meghan. Most recent on this list, and honestly, this whole ordeal has been pretty interesting to watch. It's rare for people to willingly leave the royal family, but based on the interviews conducted with Oprah, it isn't hard to see why they did it. The primary reason for their leaving were related to false articles being generated due to their fame, and moreover, the royal family's unwillingness to aid them on the matter. But it was clear that this was a long time coming, as Harry was frequently subjected to neglect by his father, not to mention he was the child of a previous marriage, which we will talk about that later. Meghan, on the other hand, was subjected to extreme amounts of passive-aggressive racism, and the press piled on top of that likely became too much. As much of an anti-monarchist as I am, it's hard for me not to at least mildly sympathize and appreciate their leaving. Number 9. Prince Harry's Halloween. What isn't hard to sympathize with is Harry's taste in costumes being fairly poor. Dressing as a German World War II officer, which is bad for a bunch of reasons I can't say by name but you should already know, was a poor idea, and the public made sure that was known. Now, as much as it's fun to pretend that Harry was the only one screwing up here, we can't really do that, and we have to note that the stated theme of the costume party was colonials and natives. Yeah, it's pretty bad. William apparently did also attend that one as well, but I'm certain he didn't dress in anything that similarly demeaned victims of cultural and genetic erasure. Right? Yeah, look, it's nice that Harry left the family, but as long as he bears the blood of royals, he will profit off everything that was spilt in their name. Spare will probably be an interesting read though.
Next up is a literal Disney castle. What Ludwig II really loved was castles. Sure, he already had a bunch, but he wanted more, and he wanted them to look like they just came out of fairy tale pop-up books. So much so, he didn't actually hire real architects. On more than one occasion, castles were literally designed by an opera set designer, ripping Ludwig off for being such a nitwit fanboy. One was supposed to be a replica of Versailles, another was a weird combination of styles, and one was set up atop a mountain. Neuschwanstein, Ludwig's most expensive project that's drained the Bavarian government's banks into the negatives. This castle is unbelievable though. Ludwig probably would have been thrilled to learn his fairy tale goal was achieved, as the castle became the basis for Sleeping Beauty's castle in the Disneyland parks and the inspiration for the castle in Disney's 1950 Cinderella movie. However, foreign banks threatened to seize this property in 1885, but he refused. In retaliation, the government doctored medical documents that would declare him insane and forced his removal from the throne. The private king was then found dead just weeks after moving into said new castle in 1886, floating inexplicably in the lake. Homeboy is barely cold and in the ground before the government starts trying to make a profit off of the debt-incurring castle. 7 weeks following Ludwig's mysterious death, Neuschwanstein is open to the public and remains one of the most visited castles in Germany and one of the most popular tourist and luxury hotel destinations in Europe. This next king's anthem must have been Avril Lavigne's Here's to Never growing up. King Farouk, the last king of Egypt, was so immature his mother hoped that becoming king would help him grow up. Obviously it didn't, because country rule and wealth aren't something you give immature people if you want them to change. It just gives the dude arrested development and a whole lot of power. His reign was dominated by corruption scandals, his people were impoverished, and his court was brimming with wealth. So the Egyptian army eventually intervened, driving him out in 1952. Then Then the process of clearing out his possessions began. Thousands of silk shirts, an entire fleet of Cadillacs, 50 diamond-studded golden walking sticks. Farouk collected an absurd amount of French Baroque-style furniture, and his coin collection was one of the grandest in the world, consisting of over 8,500 coins, some of which, like the 1993 $20 gold double eagle, and all 5 known examples of the 1913 Liberty head nickel, would be worth millions today, and they were then too. He once decided he wasn't a fan of the railway station he used twice a year and had the old one demolished and built a new one for millions of dollars. And what was most shocking to people at the time was his extensive adult entertainment collection. At the time, the largest adult entertainment collection in the world, worth over $1 million. Picture like when Russell Peters was on MTV Cribs and he opened that dresser drawer and inside all the DVDs had to be pixelated. It was essentially that moment, except Russell Peters actively volunteered and made fun of his collection, while Farouk, when confronted with it, happily admitted to owning it but was shocked by the lewd accusations, insisting they're just classical works of art to look at and be appreciated. This next king didn't have to buy anything, he turned the money itself into big old jars. Whew, name brace moment, okay. Maharaja Sawai Madho Singh II is the former king of Jaipur, and also the only one who's been entered into the Guinness Book of World Records. He was on his way to attend the coronation of Edward VII in 1902 and intended to bring Ganjagal holy water. When toying in what to bring it in, all the options on the market were very Macy's, and Singh, he was more of a Gucci guy. So he finds 2 very reputable silversmiths in the mystery Khana and gave them 14,000 Jaipur silver rupees, which were issued from the Kaptadara treasury of Jaipur state in 1894. These coins are then melted into sheets and shaped as the jars. No shouldering was done. So the results are 2 enormous sterling silver vessels, the largest silver objects in the world, per Guinness World Records. These Ganjalis are still presented at the Maharaja Sawai Man Singh II Museum and are a huge attraction amongst visitors. Next up is a title that needs no explanation, the Pube Procurer. Yeah, there's always that one creep. This one also happens to be voted England's worst king by a large chunk of the historian community. Says a lot, seeing as his dad was the nutcase who lost America, but maybe we're just throwing stones here. If you haven't guessed already, I'm talking about George IV, notorious for 2 things, banging and blowing the budget, which started to go hand in hand after a while. On a very short list of decent things you can say about the dude, it's actually unlikely he ever forced himself on someone without consent, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not patting him on the back, that's setting the bar pretty low, but I mean, when a woman refused his advances, the series of events following would be the first 5 stages of grief, then begging, then a tantrum, potentially more begging, sometimes threatening to take his own life in a very dramatic fashion, and then if nothing's worked, offer up money and jewels. Didn't matter if you're a working girl or a potential princess, he's willing to pay up the dough for, you know. Amazingly, despite not being a catch in any way and inflating to the size of the aunt in Harry Potter who floats away, women still agreed to have sweaty time with him, and they say money can't buy happiness. Sure did for Georgie. And P.S. when he died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair in it, which wasn't always from his mistress's heads, if you know what I mean. Because I love my subtle hints, or even not so subtle, our next is I'm a big fan. Frederick William I, King of Prussia, a tiny man with a big collection. Tall dudes. Maybe he was trying to make up for the fact he was only 5'5", but being 5'2" myself, I can't really see the appeal of walking around next to a flock of people I have to crane my head to look at constantly. So, whatever the reason, he would do absolutely anything to get more tall men, such as buy tall young men from their own custody. Just walk up to everyday dudes on the street, I want to buy you. Apparently he even kidnapped some. Other countries would try and get in his good books by sending tall guys as presents. Babies that came out larger than normal are marked with a red scarf to indicate their future recruits. If there weren't enough tall babies, let's round up the basketball and volleyball players and hop to it, guys. Frederick William literally performed a kind of eugenics, pouring money into making tall people bang in the hopes of producing a tall kid. He didn't like them just to look up at, though. He was creating his own special army regiment known as the Potsdam Giants. The only requirement to be in this group is he had to be over 6 foot, but most of the cases the men were taller than that. Being huge had its advantages because the taller you were, the more you got paid. So what was the point of this very expensive, fashionable armed regiment? Not to go to war, just to cheer up the king. He poured thousands into these men and treated them like they're his favorite toys. He would have them paraded in front of of him, sometimes in his own bedroom when he was sick in bed. Next up is the Lick It and Stick It King. So, the Queen and Prince William are said to be passionate bingo players, and Her Royal Highness used to enjoy drama novels, horse racing, and at her Scottish residence she'd host Scottish dances. Her grandfather George, though, his main hobby was stamp collecting. Starting as a young prince, he continued his collection into the time as a monarch, even through the chaos of World War I. What's unusual about George's hobby was how many stamps he collected over his lifetime. 328 albums of 60 pages each. That's nearly 20,000 pages of stamps. His passion earned him the nickname the King of Philately, which is the proper name for stamp collecting, and I can't tell if I'm saying it right, as literally nobody would know because this may truly be one of the most vacant-brained hobbies imaginable. Anyways, George becomes like a celebrity to other stamp collectors, and he's elected the vice president of their Royal Society of London Stamp Collecting Club in 1893. So in 1905, while he's still a prince, he set the new record for the most amount spent on a stamp, roughly $220,000 US today. A quarter year later, knowing the prince was an active part of the stamp community, asked if he'd heard that some damned fool had paid as much as over 1,400 pounds for one stamp. The prince got that sick moment of getting to turn around and say, yes, I was that damned fool. This one king bought so much dumb crap, it's essentially a grocery list of the obscene. So, Henry VIII, the one who smokes his wives and was full of aggression. We recently did a video on him called the Top 10 King Henry VIII Facts You Never Knew. So, if you're interested in learning more after what I tell you about what he hoarded, maybe go check that out. So, what are some of the things on Henry's stupid purchase list? Purple bagpipes. Although he didn't write Greensleeves, Henry was nevertheless a talented musician and composer and was able to spend a few £1,000s on that bad boy. A personal favorite that I learned was probably the bowling alley. Built after the birth of his son Edward in 1537, this massive expenditure was almost 200 feet long, and it was more than 3 times the length of a modern 10-pin bowling alley. Records show in 1526, Henry commissioned a pair of leather football boots that cost 4 shillings. Nowadays, that's a couple thousand. Hilariously, 14 years later in 1540, he banned football. You know what you should spend taxpayer dollars on? A codpiece so big you can hide a weapon in it. Henry is credited with popularizing the peculiar Tudor fashion for the enormous exaggerated codpieces, which during his reign established themselves as symbols of a man's virility and masculinity. The king, of course, had to have the biggest codpiece of all, and towards the end of his life, Henry's codpieces became so roomy, he could literally have glorified pockets and keep jewels and other valuables and even small weapons in there. Last but not least is 2 kings and a rager. In 1509, Henry VIII, England's most famous monarch, ascended to the throne, ensuring the Tudor succession after his father. After almost a decade of rule, the young king agreed to follow the advice of close advisor Cardinal Wolsey and try to improve England's relations with the continent. After Wolsey's efforts in 1518, the Treaty of London was signed as a non-aggression pact between the major Christian, very important detail, European powers at the time. One of the most important countries for England to make peace with was France, as the two had been beefing intermittently for literal centuries. The French king, Francis I, was only 3 years younger than Henry, and both men had been hailed in their countries as great Renaissance princes. Naturally, these 2 dudes are gonna be curious about what each other's like, and they want to meet. And for 2 dudes who are young and rich, what better way to meet than throw in a rager? A date is set for June of 1520, and what would follow is probably one of the greatest parties ever held. The meeting was an excuse for both Henry and Francis to show off their wealth of their kingdoms, and by proxy, their power. So the Field of the Cloth of Gold occurred on the 7th to 24th of June 1520, named after the gold material used for all the tents, all the costumes, and the decorations at the time, and it was 2 weeks of games, feasts, tournaments, and balls that cost the equivalent of no less than $20 million today between France and England. Between the 7th and the 24th, around 12,000 members of royal houses, nobles, guests, and servants gathered in the fields of northern France to spend dreamy days and nights in temporary palaces built of brick, timber, cloth, and glass. Guests enjoyed delicacies made from 29,000 fish, 98,000 eggs, 6,475 birds, 2,200 sheep, and endless glasses of wine. Whilst the celebrations were a success, in reality it did actually little to improve the relation between England and France, and within a few years the countries were at war once again.
Number 10. King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that that of Wallis Simpson, America's socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions. And also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, "At the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore." Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know, maybe there's something we haven't quite breaking down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3, maybe this is the plot.
At number 8, cross-dressing. Empress Elizabeth was quite the character, I guess you could say. Since she was a monarch, she could do whatever she wanted, and that is exactly what she did. You see, she was quite into fashion, more specifically men's fashion. The Empress believed that she just had legs for days, like Naomi Campbell, and she wanted to show them off to the world, but the only problem with that was the fact that back then, pants were reserved for men, and so since she wore dresses all the time, no one got to see her godly legs. Well, to combat that, Elizabeth came up with a solution. She was known to hold huge parties where everyone had to cross-dress. She only did this so that it would give her an excuse to wear pants. And I mean, she could have if she just wanted to wear them on a regular day, but she didn't want to be the only woman in men's clothing, so she made everyone else dress up too. At these parties, no one looked good or really enjoyed themselves for that matter. Women complained that the men's clothing they wore to these parties were unflattering, and the men were just all over the place because they didn't know how to maneuver a hoop skirt. The only person really having a fun time was Empress Elizabeth, but I guess that was really the whole point.
Number 7, check on the dead. Funerals are pretty expensive, especially a royal one at that. It takes a lot of power to dig up and then carry these massive caskets around, which back in the day was even more exhausting. Joanna of Castile was born in 1479. Her marriage to the Duke of Austria was arranged, but she was very much in love, maybe a bit too much. Hear me out. When her husband met his fate in 1506 due to typhoid fever, Joanna would have his tomb unearthed and then opened over and over again, just so she could make sure that he was still there. Now, of course, I feel bad for the queen here. She was clearly not coping with his death well, but to have his tomb or casket or coffin, whatever you want to call it, to have it opened and closed over and over and then dug up and then put back in the ground, she would make people carry his body around everywhere she went. That's heavy. That is so much work, even keeping it under her bed sometimes. Ugh, I got goosebumps just saying that. That's pretty creepy. Ashes, I could understand. That's like a one-man job to carry that around. But a 1,000-pound royal coffin? They have to carry 30 city blocks? My back already hurts thinking of that. No thank you. I quit.
At number 6, deadly affairs. Dating is hard. If you've ever been on dating apps like Tinder or Bumble, then you know that things aren't as easy as it may seem when it comes to finding someone that you remotely like. Maybe we should take a page out of Queen Nzinga's book when it comes to dating, because it seemed like she had fun with her escapades. Well, maybe don't actually do what she did because it's actually pretty gruesome, but you get what I'm saying. Queen Nzinga from what is now modern-day Angola was a busy woman. After taking over the throne from her brother, she juggled the monarchy, wars with the Portuguese, and having a love life. The queen pulled together a harem of only the most attractive men, but because she was such a busy person, she didn't really have the time to walk into a room and choose who she was going to sleep with that night, so she came up with an alternative solution. Nzinga would have 2 members of her harem fight each other to the death every night, and whoever won got to sleep with the queen. Solid plan, right? Well, the winner wasn't really all that lucky for too long, because she would have the winner executed the following day.
Number 5, diamond scandals. Queen Mary wasn't the only queen with sticky fingers, it seems. The affair of the diamond necklace has sparked many conversations. France's queen from 1774 to 1792 was Marie Antoinette, and if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because she was the last queen before the French Revolution. She was also known for spending a buck on jewelry. She liked the diamonds. Now this Countess de la Motte was this young lady, a friend of the queen supposedly, who entered the French court in 1785. Now she got somebody to disguise herself as the queen, and then she acted like she was in love with this high society member, all to get her hands on this $12 million necklace. Now she said that she would pay, but never ended up paying a dime, so that's horrible by itself, and the queen supposedly had no idea about any of this or what happened to the necklace. Although this countess pretended to be her friend beforehand. The public went on to hate her for this, not believing in the scandal of course. One of the most notable lines from Marie Antoinette was when the French spoke out for not being able to afford bread. She apparently said, "Well, let them eat cake," which led into the French Revolution and ultimately her demise. Shine bright like a diamond, I guess.
At number 4, test drives. Catherine the Great of Russia was well known for a number of things. She was known for being a good leader, a strong ruler, and surprisingly for her naughty bedroom fun times as well. She was well known for her adventures in baby making, and there was once a rumor that she did the deed with a horse. Obviously that wasn't actually true, however she did do it with a lot of men. The only problem that she really faced when it came to finding a new partner was actually having the time to do so. I mean, it's not like she could swipe through Tinder while sitting on her throne, right? What was most important to her was finding a new lover who was skilled in the sack, and she didn't really want to waste time on testing these guys out, so she had someone else do it for her. Catherine had a friend take her potential partner out on a test drive, so to speak, so that she wasn't wasting her time on someone who couldn't meet her standards. Remember, she is a very busy woman. It is said that on a couple of occasions, Catherine's tester friend was caught in bed with Catherine's partner again well after the Empress was with him, and that made things a little complicated, but I imagine that they got past that. Or at least I really hope they did.
Number 3. Change religion. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaton from 1353 to 1336, Queen Nefertiti aka Lady of Grace aka the Lost Queen of Egypt was only 15 years old when she married 16-year-old Akhenaton. Now alongside her new young husband, she built an entirely new capital city called Amarna and ruled over what's now considered the wealthiest period in ancient Egyptian history. But when it comes to spoiled queens, or rather queens who could do anything they believe with their power, we have to mention the queen that changed Egypt's religion. Both her and her co-ruler were in a cult, the cult of the sun god Aten. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time, and there have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, part of these sun god rituals. So now cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aten was now Egypt's main god. Some queens change laws, others change religion.
At number 2, fake village. Imagine being so privileged and so disconnected from the world that you pretend to be poor for fun. Well, that's pretty much what Marie Antoinette did. This French queen was known for her lavish and opulent lifestyle, and that's really the only life that she knew. Apparently, living the life of a rich queen started to get a little boring for her, and she wanted to find an escape, and so she got her people to build a fake village for her so that she could pretend to be a commoner. This fake village included 11 cottages, a lake, a watermill, a working dairy, a windmill, a barn, and other quote-unquote peasant buildings. Marie apparently loved this little peasant village, and she would bring other people to enjoy it too. When she brought her guests to the village, she expected them to yes-and their way through the day and really immerse themselves into their role of a common person. She would even tell her ladies to ditch the ball gowns and wear something simple to blend in. Marie even took her kids to the fake village to teach them about farming. Even though she loved her pretend peasant lifestyle, it still didn't help her bond with the real common people, and it certainly didn't save her from the guillotine.
And finally coming in at a number 1 spot, surprise entrance. The last true pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, ruled from 69 to 30 BC. She's known mainly for her love interest, of course her two mans, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. And to this day we're still trying to uncover more dazzling details of the lost queen. Now she ruled alongside her young brother, and her life was much more than being just beautiful, which is what everyone seems to focus on more than anything. Both children were assigned to the throne, Cleopatra being 18 and little bro being 10 years old. So Cleopatra, being a little older, therefore a little wiser, became the ruler. A couple of years passed and eventually Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria over her greed for power, classic, but her little brother, equally a co-ruler, had her driven out. He was jealous, and honestly, I'm the youngest in my family, I kinda get it. But Cleopatra wasn't quite done yet. She had a few tricks up her sleeve. Believing she was the goddess Isis reborn, this beautiful goddess, Cleopatra made these dazzling entrances whenever she could, most notably in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria during that family feud with Ptolemy VIII. She wanted to meet the Roman general, but she couldn't be seen because there was a little bit of family beef, so she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack and then personally delivered to Caesar's bedroom. Hashtag your order has arrived. Surprise. Now she won the heart of Rome's future dictator here obviously, and eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, and in the following battle he drowned in the Nile River, resulting in Cleopatra's return to power.